I'll call this meeting to order. Roll call, Mr. Fred Dickey,
Present.
Ms. Mayra Hernandez, Dr. Rodney Rodriguez,
Present.
John Villarreal, present. Arturo Dominguez,
Here.
Alma Acevedo, absent. Rafael Dueñas. Here. Julian Roknowski,
Here.
Joe Baldonado. Very good. We do have a quorum. So first order of business to bring in the first applicant. You know,
He's a good friend. So he's a good friend of mine.
some properties on Zapata.
Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
Good
Welcome to
afternoon,
Laredo.
sir.
Okay, all right, thank you. This is definitely different.
Well, I'd rather be around a smaller table instead of looking at that's my personal opinion.
I know, right?
Hi, Mr. Garcia, how are you?
Hi, good, thank you.
Good. My name is Melina Bermudez. I'm the HR Director for the City of Laredo. So I just wanted to, before we start, I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of how the process is going to work today. So what's going to happen is I'm going to take about the first 22 to 26 minutes to ask some general overall questions, okay?
Okay,
I would ask that you keep your answers concise, as there's a lot of questions that our committee also wants to ask.
okay,
Please know that it's possible that after you finish an answer, that they may ask for clarification or follow-up questions based off of the information that you just provided us.
okay, that's fine.
The second part of the interview is where the Economic Development Advisory Committee is going to ask you their own questions. And so it's also possible that there may be follow-up from those questions as
that's
well.
fine.
And then after that, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions to the committee or to us in HR.
Okay,
Okay?
all right.
All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. Tell us a bit about your work background and then give us a description of how you think it relates to our current opening.
Right, well, my background, I started in newspapers after I served 6 years in the Air Force, so I'm a veteran. I served during Desert Storm, and I finished up at Texas State and went to work at newspapers as a reporter and editor. I did that for about 15 years, and then I moved into government relations at the city of McAllen, which I did that for about 8 years, and then economic development the last 4 years there in Mission. How that relates to the position here is that in government relations especially, we worked on a lot of economic development that wasn't directly economic development. So working in Washington, working in Austin to try to get things done on the transportation end, on the transit end, at the airport, et cetera, all those lead to economic development. And I think that being a conduit for McAllen and Mission and Austin and DC and being comfortable in those environments and working with Congressman Cuellar's office, who is our congressman in McAllen and Mission, and certainly the staffs of Senator Cornyn and Cruz and so forth, and Hinojosa before them, was something that I was able to learn and know that that was definitely economic development in that respect. In Mission, it's been more direct. I've been able to work on projects in terms of recruitment, in terms of workforce development, in terms of marketing the city and so forth to businesses and other folks who want to look at it for tourism and other things. So those are some of it. In terms of the newspaper, and People always ask me, hey, do you miss newspaper? And I always say, of course I do. I miss a lot of things I've done before. And I miss the military a little bit. But newspapers gave me a great grounding for communication and writing and content creation. And those are really at the heart of a lot of things that people do on a daily basis, whether you're writing grants or whether you're writing a letter or you're making a presentation. That's really has served me well, and I'm proud to have done that.
What do you know about Laredo and the major local businesses involved in sustainable business practices?
Okay, so the Tecos are back in town, so that's one business that Laredo's been able to draw back to the baseball stadium. No, but joking aside, Laredo, I'm a geography student. I pay a lot of attention to the state of Texas, and Laredo's always been a trade and logistics hub for a long time, probably since its founding back in 1755 or whatever that year was. And so that's the strength of Laredo. And some of the largest employers, in Laredo, on the public sectors are obviously the school districts and the county government, city government, and so forth. But on the private sector, you've got your retails like H-E-Bs and Targets and Walmarts that employ a lot of people. But the hospitals, the medical industry also employ a lot of folks. And that's obviously very important. In fact, I think your comprehensive plan pointed out that that's one major point of growth for Laredo was looking at the medical industry as a target industry in order to help that grow in terms of high-paying jobs and education. There's a lot of as everyone here knows, there's a lot of small businesses in Laredo, kind of like in McAllen or Brownsville, where I also lived, is where you have your under 50 or even under 10 that help drive the economy. You hear that constantly over and over is, hey, small businesses, the backbone of the United States. Well, that's really evident here in Laredo. I think that's really evident all along the border. And so I'm familiar with Laredo in that sense. I've been here many, many times for work. And for pleasure. I've been here on historic visits, visits to Nuevo Laredo, so I feel pretty comfortable here.
Would you define small business as far as, I guess, income-wise? Because, what to you is small business, what to you is large business?
Right, well, let me back up a second and say that, the SBA.
And I agree that small business is the backbone of every community.
Right, the Small Business Administration, they say 500 or below is small business. Mm-hmm. But the way we've always looked at small business in my practice has been like 10 or under. That's really small. You can have a lot of restaurants that may have more. Maybe they have 10 full-time and 10 part-time, or 15 part-time and 5 full-time. Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of businesses that I'm talking about that usually may need of assistance of a microloan. $5,000 or less to get started or to expand. Maybe they need something to do with their facade or maybe they need some small business training. Those are the kind of small businesses that I've been accustomed to dealing with.
Tell us about your greatest achievement in your last or current position.
Boy, that's a good one. I think at the Mission Economic Development Corporation, if you're not too familiar with Mission, it's about a city of getting close to 100,000 people, so it's not small. But I think what I've been able to do is not one singular thing there at Mission, but using my background in marketing and public relations and government relations, been able to not only learn but also get people to understand and accept what digital and social media is. And we've been able to use that and grow our followers by 300%. Granted, we're still small. We're still under 5,000 followers on Facebook and people who share our things. But all around the region, even in San Antonio and in key places like in Austin or DC, people follow us on Facebook and on Instagram and other platforms to know what we're doing. And it takes convincing to folks who are unfamiliar with it or think that social media is for kids, to know that it's a very powerful tool in business development. Whether you're a restaurant or whether you're a balloon shop or whether you're a steel company, you can use social media and digital media platforms to really enhance your bottom line. And it's taken a while to get people to come around to that concept and be comfortable with it. And there's still a lot of things that make people uncomfortable with social digital media, and I get that. It's not something you can really shove it down somebody's throat. But that's been a big accomplishment, I think, for us to get really comfortable with that and be able to use it to our advantage. One other thing I'd like to mention is this wasn't at a previous position. This was just something I was doing to help somebody out. At the Rio Grande Valley Chamber of Commerce, or the partnership it's now called, which is a regional chamber in the valley, they wanted to start a leadership program, sort of like you see anywhere, Leadership McAllen or Leadership San Antonio, whatever the case is. And they asked me if I would undertake that task, and I did. So we started a leadership academy for the Rio Grande Valley Partnership from scratch. We wrote all the rules, we wrote all the bylaws, and then we did the recruitment, and then I was able to do the whole programming for the first year. Now it's running on its own, and they do it. But that was a major undertaking. I'm really proud of it. It's something that hopefully it'll never go away, and I can always say that I was part of the very first group that did that. So that's another accomplishment I'd like to mention.
Mr. Garcia, Dr. Rodney Rodriguez for the record. I just have a follow-up because the makeup of the valley is very unique. You have Mission, you have McAllen, then you have Far San Juan. So everything's together. I'm just wondering, do you know how those economic development sectors differentiate between each other, or is it a holistic grouping of all those surrounding cities?
Right. Well, on Friday night, they all battle against each other, and they all go to their separate cities or schools. But no, there's a big component of all those EDCs that work together, and then there's part of them that don't work together. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that there's still competition among the EDCs. It's not solely one whole entity. So, if Brownsville is trying to land a company that McAllen might be looking at, well, they're probably going to compete at it. They'll try to avoid that, but when it comes down to the end of the day, they'll probably compete for it. A lot of times, when it comes to retail, they'll compete for that specialty retail or destination retail. If it's a big project, let's say that's coming directly from the governor's office, when he makes that phone call to the EDC, well, they'll usually just go with whatever the governor's office has said. So if they want to go to McAllen or Laredo, no one's going to try to get underneath. Pardon me, not Laredo, but Brownsville. No one's going to try to undermine that. So there's cooperation and there's not cooperation. There's a lot of meetings during the year where all the EDCs and cities get together and they talk. And I would say that every one of the EDCs talks to each other and it's on a friendly basis, knowing that sometimes they're going to have to compete.
Thank you.
You talked about that your greatest accomplishment was enhancing the digital presence, and which is very, very important. How more important, though, is a digital presence to bring economic development? How would you use a digital presence to enhance our economic development?
No, that's a great question. That's a question that a lot of folks.
Excuse me, Fred Dickey for the record. So,
that's a great question. That's a question that a lot of folks and entities wrestle with. I think the first step is to look at as digital media, whatever presence you might have, from a basic Facebook page to a web page, that's your storefront. That is what people will see. That's just like walking in front of somebody's door. So you have to know that is something that is going to be used by people, and sometimes we have to look at kind of reverse that kind of question and ask ourselves that. Because when we want to search something or someone says, hey, did you see, who was that in that movie? Hey, what store was that on that street? The first thing you do is pick up your phone and look, right? And so you have to know that people are looking, they're searching you, and so you have to have a plan for your digital media, so it's cohesive with what your storefront is, and the information there is updated, it's correct, because that's the last thing you want to do is just like someone walking up to your door and going like this and it doesn't open, right? I mean, digital media, if your page isn't open or your information is correct, you're going to get the same kind of frown that you would on a physical sense. So it's very important, and you have to address it little by little, and you have to know what you're doing.
Thank you.
Tell us about a career goal that you have accomplished and why that was important to you.
One of my career goals earlier on was to become the editor-in-chief of a newspaper, and I was able to accomplish that. I became the editor-in-chief of the Brownsville Herald, and it was about 60 employees, and my newsroom budget was about $1.5, $1.6 million. So that was a lot of fun. It was a serious business as well. 9/11 happened during that time when I was there, as well as the South Padre Island Queen Isabella Bridge was hit by a ferry, which people automatically thought it was was terrorism, but we didn't know that at the time. So during those times, and that kind of really gave me a sense of how important the job was, and so that was a goal early on. Once I got into government relations, I realized that I wanted to do economic development, and I wanted to have a position in economic development and then become an economic development director after I learned the ropes some. So I was able to do that, and so once I was hired on in mission, I've been able to learn quite a bit, and so far I'm working toward that goal of becoming a director.
Tell us about a time when you used economic environment data to support a successful project.
I'll go back to when I was in McAllen, and we used data when we were working on an airport revitalization and modernization projects. We had several, but we had to use passenger data. We had to use onboard and offboard data. We had to use economic development data, for instance, how much each passenger would spend that would come to McAllen. All this was needed to be compiled in order to make our case to the federal government for expansions at the airport. We were able to do that. I certainly wasn't, look, let me just back up and say, anything that I've done, I've never done by myself. It's always been in teams. And I may have spearheaded one team or another. Other times it was just part teams. But economic development, you can't do alone. You have to do it with partners and as a team. And that's one of the things that we did at the airport. And we were able to put together an impressive enough package to score a couple of grants, but also just convince the FAA that we needed to expand the number of gates we had. We needed to extend our runway. We needed to revitalize the inside of the airport, and then use the passenger fees that we were collecting as leverage to do that sort of project. There's other instances where we've used job data, education data, economic development data, using a sort of plethora of state and federal resources that keep that kind of information around, whether it's trade or bridge crossings or graduation rates and all that kind of thing that you can leverage to make your case for something that you need.
If I can, Julian Rotnowski for the record, if I can ask a follow-up question to that. Have you ever used cluster analysis to target a specific industry or develop possibly a new industry?
The organizations that have worked for, they have done that. I've not been closely involved in that. that kind of recruitment, using that information for that recruitment. But I know that Missions use it and McAllen's use it as well. It can be successful. You have to figure out, what your target is. You have to figure out what kind of cluster you're trying to build. Is it a brand new cluster? Is it the cluster that already exists in your community that you want to expand on? But clustering is a very important tool to use and how you develop what you're going to recruit. As you know, I mean, clustering is a really big deal. I mean, if you look at Laredo, I mean, Laredo's transportation and logistics industry is huge, but the manufacturing isn't. On the flip side, McAllen's manufacturing is a lot bigger, but their logistics industry is not. So people cluster and it works very well.
Thank you.
What have you done in your previous positions at other companies that made a significant difference to the business and for which you believe you will be remembered?
They remember me over there, huh? Look, I've worked really hard and smart at every place that I go. I think I've dedicated myself to every employer that I've worked at, and I'll go back a few. At the Arizona Republic, where I worked for 5 years, I was the newspaper in Phoenix. I was the highest ranking Hispanic editor at that time, and the reason that matters for Phoenix is because they didn't have any people of color in their power structure. So I was asked to put together a way to diversify the newspaper's ranks, and so we did that. And I was able to change a lot of the groupthink at the paper, how the paper covered Hispanics, how they covered minorities, how to cover the border, and how it covered Mexico. So I was very proud of that. I think in McAllen's sake, they never had a government affairs person before they hired me, and so they wanted me to establish very good relationships with all our elected leaders in Austin and DC. I think I was able to do that and set the bar moving forward. I mentioned Congressman Cuellar before, but also with John Cornyn's office, with Ted Cruz's office, with Ruben Hinojosa's office, who's a representative also in the Valley. Once we were able to establish that and have good working relationships, we were able to get a lot more things done than before. So hopefully those kind of things would be something they remember me by, but I certainly am proud of that work.
Describe a time when you needed to use the principles of logic to solve a problem.
Okay, well, in government affairs work, which is like I said, also kind of default economic development work, when you're trying to do something, you're going to get a lot of dead ends when you're asking for stuff, whether it's in Austin, whether it's with TxDOT, whether it's in DC, and if you're trying to build a new overpass or a new loop, and that's your task, that's economic development, especially in a city like Laredo that has the logistics industry as its backbone for economic development. If you don't have good roads, you're not going to have good economic development. So when we had those tasks put in front of me, you definitely have to use the power of logic and everything else in order to get something done. It kind of reminds me of the little puzzle, or maze where a little rat has to get from one end to the other. If one door closes, you have to move to another side. You have to figure out people's connections. You have to understand what one staff is good at and the other. You have to figure out who in your local community as a resource can help you. And you can leverage that to help get to your goal. So we really have to look at economic development holistically in a lot of ways to figure out how you can get things done by putting all these pieces together if that's the goal. And so I've learned a lot. I've had a lot of mentors. Certainly didn't pick it up all on my own, but when you're doing a job as wide, that encompasses such a wide scope like economic development, you have to use every resource and every like, every cell in your brain to try to get the goal accomplished.
Can you name the most important mentor to you, or the biggest impression, or who you've tried to model?
Yes, yes, of course. My biggest mentor in city government and economic development has been Mike Pettis. Mike Pettis, who was the city manager in McAllen for 22 years. He's now the city manager in Weslaco after he was going to retire supposedly, but now he's a city manager in Weslaco, and Mike was important in a lot of ways, but mostly he was open to mentoring people. He was the president of the Texas City Managers Association. He was on the International City Managers Association Executive Committee. He liked helping people that came up under him, and so I appreciate that. He took McAllen from having just a couple of $1 million in their reserve to having close to $300 million in their reserve.
Thank you.
Tell me about a time when you identified a need for a new approach or product to meet a market need.
At my current position at the Mission EDC, as I mentioned, digital media before, and that's my role as you can see in my title. My job is external relations and communications, and there really wasn't any sort of plan for partnerships or communications. So I was able to start from the ground up on that. Which was kind of cool in a way that there wasn't anything done. So you don't have to scrap a plan that's already there. You start fresh. I got the backing of my CEO, and we started from the ground up. And as I mentioned, we started using social media to talk about the small business projects and programs that were available to the public. We talked about our accomplishments. We've been able to raise the profile of the organization quite a bit. We have more participation. We've got some more small businesses in Mission, and then the partnership side. One of my tasks was to go find partners that would join us, and we're really focused on small business in Mission. So we wanted to make sure to find people that could partner with us to help us with small business. And we've gone out and found Wells Fargo, and they've supported us with grants. And BBVA has really jumped in and provided us with tens of thousands of dollars worth of grants that are aimed at small businesses that go through our programs. So those are just a few of the accomplishments that we've been able to do.
Have you ever faced a significant ethical challenge or a conflict of interest at work, and how did you handle that?
Well, I will say that in government relations, people will call you a lobbyist because you're kind of that person, and so you can imagine in government work in the halls of Austin and that kind of thing. I don't really remember any particular incident or anything of that nature that came up where I would have compromised myself. But you have to really walk the straight and narrow, and that's what I have always thought in my career as a journalist, and then also as a government employee. That I know how to steer away from situations that might be. Where I might have to compromise myself, and I understand what ethical behavior is, and so I just really kind of walk that line of being transparent, and staying away from situations that as an adult who's 53 years old that you learn how to stay away from, and so that's something that I really pride myself on, and I've never had. Those kind of issues come up, but certainly in that line of work, they can come up, and you have to be very cognizant of them and know how to deal with them when they do come up.
Describe a time when you had to make a very important and difficult decision that affected everyone in your department.
when I, as a supervisor, in a previous job as an editor, you know, I was faced with a situation where one of my subordinate editors was very good, but also very good at editing, but not very good at setting morale and being a good human relations person in newsroom. And after speaking to this person a couple of times, and then also you know, having some sort of written session with them, their behavior never improved. He was liked by a lot of folks, but in the newsroom, but that's something that we just couldn't. We just really couldn't tolerate that kind of behavior in a newsroom. That where there was a lot of young men and women that worked that were very impressionable, and so after a lot of thought and some anguish, you know, I just said, okay, well this person is going to have to not be in this newsroom anymore, and we're going to have to let them go. And that affected a lot of people. It was a very difficult decision. I didn't like doing it, but that was part of the job, and that's something I had to do for the betterment of the whole business. So that person was gone, and in the long run, the newspaper was better for it. But those are difficult, and I'm not scared of those situations. I would certainly try to do work to not get in those situations, but that's what I was handed, so I had to deal with that.
Arturo Dominguez for the record.
Hello, Arturo.
What was the problem with that person?
The person was,
Attitude?
yes, yeah, it was a very difficult person to deal with the people that weren't his best friends. And so he would use bad language with women especially. If like I said, if the person wasn't his friend, then he didn't like working with them. And the language and his actions in the newsroom were not acceptable, you know, to me. And I thought I could work with the person and try to better the situation, but he didn't want to do it because I came into the job and he had already been there. So he didn't want to really move because he thought, well, he was there for some time. So I was a new guy. And at that time, I was like, I don't remember my age, but he was older than I was. So he definitely didn't want to do that.
He was good.
He was a good wordsmith with that, but
And you fired him.
had to let him go. Had to fire him. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. I mean, I gave him chances. I mean, we went through several situations, but it just didn't improve.
Let's say you've been approached with a new idea for your department. Describe how you go about determining the feasibility and possible success of that idea.
Well, I like new ideas a lot, and so I usually I try to analyze the idea. Is it something that we can incorporate? What do my bosses think of it? You know, is it something that's scrapping another idea? Is it an addition to a program? Can I see the benefits of it? Is there something I can look at or figure out that might help us? You know, immediately. Is it a long-term idea? But I like new thoughts. I like to bring new ideas to the table myself. So I like when people bring them to me and for us to think about them and analyze them to see if there's something we can do. Not every new idea is going to be good, but it's better than not having any ideas. And so, yeah, I welcome those. And just I think through a informal and formal process, you find out whether that's going to work for you or not.
Describe what you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You talked about analyzing new ideas and you like new, describe a little bit how you analyze a new idea.
Well, it just, you know, it kind of depends what the idea is, but let's say in regard to economic development, if someone says, hey, look, I've got an idea to, you know, create this new cluster of business. We were talking about clusters before. Okay, well, let's see what it is. And so we can put, you know, real pencil to paper if it involves money, which most ideas do. Let's figure out if it's something feasible. Do we have the budget for it? Is it something that the community would accept? Is it something that our bosses would like? Do you think we would like? Can we present it to them? Does it look like it's achievable? Is it realistic? Those are all kind of questions to ask as we're formulating, an answer to whether this idea is any good or not, or if it's achievable. And so, there's certainly a long line of questions to ask. One thing that I don't do, and maybe it's because I'm getting older, but I usually don't jump into that idea too quickly. I can get excited by it, but let's look at it. Let's see if we can do it.
Thank you.
Here you are.
Describe what you see as your strengths related to this job or position, and then also describe what you see as your areas of development or opportunity related to this position.
I'll answer the ending first. There's always room for development, for learning. Right now, I've been attending International Economic Development Council classes, certification classes, and trying to learn as much as possible. I talk to colleagues. I talk to different leaders, other EDC folks who have been around longer than I have, to try to understand what they do. I can look at best practices from across the state or the country to see how that helps me. So I'm always willing to learn. I always look for things that can help me, and when they help me, they help my employer. So whatever I soak in, I'm gonna bring back, whether it's business recruitment and retention, whether it's small business development, whatever the case is. I always look for ways to improve. I think my set of skills that I've been able to develop over the last 15 years or so, as a communicator, as a government affairs person, as an economic developer, a really kind of unique set of skills that really can help here. I mentioned my ability to write and communicate, which is a strong point. I think will serve well here. Understanding the tenets of basic economic development, I think will help here. My ability to work with our congressional, state and state leaders in Austin and Laredo and in Washington, I think will help a lot. Let's take one bit of that for instance. The citizenship question for the census is up, and it's going before the courts in Maryland, I think, this week. Well, Laredo has about 26% of population is foreign-born residents. So just imagine if Laredo doesn't get to count nearly 1/4 of its population on its census, and therefore is directly impacted by federal funding because they base it on population. So that's not a direct economic development issue in terms of like a recruiting a business to town, or looking at a recruitment sheet of incentives or tax abatements or whatever the case is, but it's really impactful. So economic developers really need to be aware of something like that. So I think given that situation, I wanted to bring that up because I'm comfortable in dealing with those. I've dealt with CBP, I've dealt with SST and SRE in Mexico. I've worked on bridge issues. I've worked on economic development issues. I've worked on small business. I have worked in digital media. I think I can bring that together here to get Laredo where it wants to go. I want to be helpful in that. The last thing I'd like to mention there is, I grew up in Kennedy, Texas, which is in Karnes County. My family's from the San Diego area, my dad's side of the family. And I've lived in the valley for about, about 20 years, give or take. And I've been to El Paso, I've been to Del Rio, I've been to Aguila, I've been to Laredo and Rio Grande, and lived in Brownsville. And so I get the border, I understand it. I like it. If I didn't, I would be somewhere else. So I really do believe that Laredo is on the cusp of doing something great, and I want to be part of it.
Dr. Rodney Rodriguez, for the record, you mentioned the International Economic Development Council, which is an accrediting entity for
Yes.
economic developers. How many classes have you already taken
I have
towards the
taken,
certification?
yes, I have taken, I believe, Dr. Rodriguez, I believe I've taken 5 classes, and I need 8 to accomplish the certification process. A lot of that is timing. First of all, you have to be in economic development strictly for 4 years before you can test for the certification. And I'm approaching 4 years, and then you have to take the certain amount of classes. Sometimes they're only offered once a year. So if you miss that, you have to wait another whole year. So some of that is timing, but I'm working on it, and I think the classes are really good.
Thank you.
That's a goal of yours to get that certification? I
Yes,
presume?
sir, for sure.
Thank you.
How will your work performance enhance the city of Laredo in economic development initiatives as it is today?
Right. Well, I hope to help Laredo get to the goals that it's set for itself. If it's according to the comprehensive plan, or whether it's something else that's come up since the comprehensive plan has been established. If it's more retail, if it's clustering, if it's manufacturing. I think that my work with all the local partners, from the Laredo EDC to the Workforce Commission offices, which is Solutions, Workforce Solutions in Laredo, to LCC, to Mile One, whoever it is that I need to reach out to and work with in partnership. I think that I can help Laredo get to that point using the skills that I have, understanding the economic development process, whether it's a retailer who's looking for a pad site, a landowner who wants to develop an empty lot, or whatever the case is. I'm willing to step in and help. Also to receive direction from the council, the mayor and the city, when the city manager gets named, also received direction from them to see what the goals are. I know some of the short-term goals for Laredo, at least what I've seen, is expanding I-35, finishing up the intersection, putting more overpasses on the loop. All those are important. You have to have TxDOT as a partner for that. And so I've worked with TxDOT for many years. I know a lot of folks that work there. And then also the state offices from the senators and the local reps that represent the area, to work with them to get the funding that's needed.
Mr. Garcia, for the record, my name is John Villarreal. Question for you, as far as the work performance, have you worked with any of the tax incentive tools such as TERS, TRISs, and NEZs, municipal districts, things of that nature?
I've worked, my experience has been limited to working with the TERS, which we have in Mission, and there's several in Hidalgo County, using, sectoring off, as you know how they work, you sector off a certain area and having the taxes from that area be used and reinvest in that area. I know FAR has some, and Hidalgo County has some, the Westlaco, and Mission has a big chunk. And we've been using that money to do infrastructure development in the southern part of the city, where we have a huge development called the Sharyland Plantation, which by the way, I think the Killam family is buying here soon. So, but we've been able to do lift stations, water, wastewater, all that kind of thing, road building, etc.
Rafael Dueñas, for the record.
Hi.
Do you have any goals of your own for the city of Laredo, or are you just looking to fall in line with what has already been set forth? And if so, what goals would those be?
That's a really good question. I think I can see me developing some goals for Laredo. If I became the economic development director for Laredo, I think that some of those would start to sort of open up for me to see what they are. But one thing I don't have anything specific that I wouldn't necessarily do myself for Laredo, but I would say that one thing that I would help to try to see Laredo do is finish off whatever they want to do with their international bridge systems. If they want to add another bridge, I feel I can really help there. I worked on the Ansel Lewis Bridge from McAllen for about 5 years, and getting that open and putting fast lanes in and changing the hours. And all that sounds easy, but it takes years to do, right? So, I mean, that was tough, but I'd like to see, you know, if that's what Laredo's will is to do that, and I want to help do that. I think that once I get in place, I would try to look at survey the situation, and if it's a Dave and Buster's, well, let's do it. You know, if it's another bridge, let's do it. One thing I always do, and I will always do for Laredo, which I've done for McAllen and Mission, and that these cities are quite a bit different, right? But there's one thing that really is common among the cities, and that is either the lack of respect or notoriety in the rest of the state or nationally. So if you go up to the I-35, I-45 triangle, Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, people just think, Laredo, the Valley, El Paso. I mean, and to some degree, the Panhandle and even East Texas, like Beaumont. You get left out of the equation. And one of the goals would be for me, if I was here for Laredo, is to make sure to get up front and make sure that I fight for Laredo's reputation, and also to make sure they're represented in those kind of meetings where we're often left out of. And so that's certainly a promise that I would want to fulfill when I'm here.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, the committee has individual questions for you.
Okay, great.
We're going to start from right to left again, Mr. Dominguez.
This is a trade question, Arturo Dominguez for the record. This is just a trade question. If President Trump would have imposed that 5%, how would it affect our city or our nation?
Oh, yes, of course. Well, it certainly would be detrimental, obviously. Anything of that nature, and please keep in mind when I make these comments, it's not because of these aren't political in nature. These are statements of fact. The current situation in Washington has, in regards to your question, has industry very nervous, and in their case, unpredictable for their own futures. They don't know if it's going to be 5% or if they're going to go another 2 years without a 5% tariff. What I understand, what business wants to know, especially when you make a huge investment in buying machines for manufacturing, or you're building a warehouse, or you're buying 15 new trucks, you want to know if you're going to be able to use them how you think you're going to be able to use them based on the current climate, or based on the client or the climate that would exist the next 5 years. So if someone's threatening that they're going to do 5% and then they don't do it, but then they might do it again 2 months later, that's just not very good for business anywhere along the border, as much as Laredo has at stake for them.
This is very hypothetical. What if it did come to pass? How would you combat that so as not to lose our market share of whatever?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would do is I'd have to talk to our industry leaders and say, okay, what is going to be the biggest issue for you? Are you going to have to move? Are you thinking of moving away? How can we help you, given our tools and our toolbox? How can we help you stay prosperous and still be in Laredo? And let me hear your feedback. I would speak to brokers. I would speak to logistics leaders. I'd speak to our friends in Mexico, in Nuevo Laredo, and try to figure out what our best response is going to be. I would figure that there's people here in Laredo that really could be helpful in trying to get that answer. But definitely you need to talk to people right away and say, what can we do?
What if we would go into a recession?
Huh?
What if we would go into a recession? That's what it looked like.
We went into one. Well, how many years ago now is it that we went into one? You certainly don't want to think about that, but it could be a reality for us. Laredo's done well since the last recession. I think you've been able to grow a lot of jobs. You know, in the last 5 years, I think Laredo's added over 8,000 jobs up to April. 8,200 jobs in the last 5 years, mainly because probably the shale and then trade. But when a recession is coming, maybe, you know, we're able to read the tea leaves right and see it coming and be able to, you know, be able to guard against it. One thing that we need to do, I think, is if I was part of this team, is definitely keep hitting education. I know Dr. Rodriguez is at Laredo Community College, but we have to improve our education base in order to be successful. And you go to industries that are, I wouldn't say recession-proof, but pretty close to it, like the medical industry, and hiring more nurses and doctors, and trying to create a more of an entrepreneurial climate in the medical area. You look at, just for example, in the McAllen area, or just McAllen, there is 4 major hospitals. They employ thousands of people, and it has not stopped growing. Not just because Mexican nationals keep feeding that system, but just from the general population. Like FAR has close to 100,000 people. It doesn't have a hospital. San Juan doesn't have a hospital. Alamo doesn't have a hospital, right? They all go to McAllen. So McAllen's been able to concentrate those hospitals in the city, and it's been a tremendous